Joining me now is from the Voice of the Martyrs is Todd Nettleton. And Todd, we're looking at India, and a lot of people don't think of India as a place off the top of their heads that is one of deep religious persecutions. But we had the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom just sort of levy a harsh recommendation against them, and the government there wasn't pleased. So tell me about what's going on there.
Well, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom issues a report every spring looking back at the previous year. So this is a report based on the different religious freedom happenings that happened in calendar 2019. The report talks about a drastic turn downward as it relates to religious freedom in India in 2019. Particularly, the report talks about some of the things the Hindu nationalist government has done against Muslim citizens of India. But obviously, as they want every Indian to be a Hindu, that affects our Christian brothers and sisters as well.
So what types of things are we seeing on the ground there? I mean, at least for me and my perspective, I don't think of India that way. You just don't see a lot about it in the news. So what are the types of things that happen to Christians and other non-Hindus there on the ground? What is this persecution taking form as?
Well, as it relates to Muslims, there have been some very significant efforts to exclude them from citizenship. One of the things that the Indian government is trying to do is set up a national registry of citizens, and they are going to people and saying, hey, you have to register your citizenship, and by the way, you need to prove that you were in India or your family was in India in 1970. And for many Indians, they don't have that kind of documentation, and so the Indian government is saying, well, you're not a citizen anymore. Well, what do you do if your parents were born in the country and you were born in the country, and now all of a sudden they say you're not a citizen, you should go back to Bangladesh or you should go somewhere else? So that is affecting literally millions of Indians. As it relates to Christians, and I agree with you, many people don't think of India as a persecutor. In fact, India brags about being the world's largest functioning democracy. They had national elections last year. The Hindu nationalist government was reelected in a landslide. But also in 2019, according to the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, there were more than 300 attacks on Christian sites, prayer meetings, churches, over 300 in the course of a single year. That's a reflection of what the state of religious freedom is in India right now.
Yeah, and we at CBN, we've reported on several of these types of things. I've seen video of Bibles being burned. They've been collected up and being burned in the ground there because they don't want to see the spread of Christianity. And there are lots of other stories about Christian missionaries being targeted over there as well. So what is underneath all of this? From the prime minister, you see him getting reelected, like you said, in a landslide. But what is the motivating factor that's driving this persecution?
The key thing for people to understand is this Hindutva ideology. This is the ideology that India is a Hindu land. Literally, the soil is Hindu soil, and everybody who is in India should be a Hindu. So if you're not, if you're a Muslim, if you're a Christian, if you're a Sikh, really what you should do is change your religion and become a Hindu, or you should find a different place to live. You don't belong here. In fact, Indian government officials have referred to India as Hindustan, literally the land of the Hindus. So that's the philosophy that is motivating a lot of these decisions. When it comes to anti-conversion laws, when it comes to who can be a citizen, who can register their citizenship, and radical Hindus going down to the village level, they see this from the national government, and they know if I attack a church, if I attack a pastor, if I burn a shipment of Bibles, nothing's going to happen to me. I'm going to walk free. I'm not going to be held accountable to that. And so that has led to an increase in attacks, an increase in violence against all religious minorities in India, including our Christian brothers and sisters there.
Yeah, it's interesting because President Trump recently visited there and by Modi promised him that this was, religious freedom was a top concern of his. But when you hear what you're talking about with the authorities and you read the reports about how authorities stand down on those sorts of incidents. And it's almost unfathomable for us as Americans to imagine authorities just allowing that stuff to happen. So how are the people there on the ground? How are the Christians on the ground reacting, and how are they able to deal with this sort of persecution that's going on, and the Muslims too?
Well, one of the things that is happening is Christians in India, and especially church leaders, are very clear-eyed about what's coming. They know there's going to be more persecution. They know it's probably going to get worse for them. And not too long ago, one of my coworkers here at the Voice of the Martyrs was at a meeting of different Indian ministry leaders and pastors. And he said at one point during the meeting, the pastor of a large church in a major city in India, where typically 5 or 10 years ago in a major city, you would not have seen persecution. Sure, it happened at the village level, but mostly in the big cities, things were fine. This pastor of a large church in a big city said, he looked around the room at these Christian leaders and he said, we need to be ready. Some of us are going to go to prison. Some of us may even be called to lay down our lives for the gospel. So the Christians there, and especially the church leaders, are very aware of what's happening. They're very aware of what is on the horizon for them as far as persecution, and they're counting the cost. They're committing in their hearts, we are going to follow Christ. We are going to further his ministry and further the Great Commission in spite of opposition, in spite of what our government may do against us. And so they have already counted the cost, and they're ready for when the persecution continues to get worse.
What is the religious makeup of India? How is it broken down? What type of minority are we looking at as for Christians compared to Hindus?
Well, the vast majority of India's people are Hindus. I don't have the exact percentages right in front of me. Then the secondary group would be Muslims. And, India is I think is the second most populous Muslim country in the world, which is hard for people to believe. But literally, there are hundreds of millions of Muslims in India, as well as Hindus. Christians make up a small minority. I believe it's less than 5%. Again, I don't have that right in front of me. So they are a small minority, and they're very aware that the government right now is focused on Muslims, but we're next. They're watching us as well, and so they see persecution coming on the horizon.
That's interesting. Did you notice there that is there any camaraderie formed at all by Muslims and Christians there both being in the minority, or is there still, because as we know in the Middle East, there's obviously tensions between Muslims and Christians in other parts, but does that cause them to be united in any way, a common sort of foe, or does that not take place?
I think it does somewhat unite them in kind of a political level, on a political level. Hey, we're both minorities. We both want to make sure India stays a secular country, that it doesn't choose or favor people based on their religious background. But on a ministry level, of course, our Christian brothers and sisters want to reach out to their Muslim friends and their Muslim neighbors. And the Muslims obviously would be concerned about that if Muslims are coming to Christ. I think on a kind of a political level, yes, there are times where they say, hey, we're on the same side of the table. Let's work together. But obviously, our Christian brothers and sisters are also trying to reach Muslims with the gospel of Christ.
Absolutely. So what's Voice of the Martyrs able to do, and what are you guys focused on the ground over there in the midst of this increasing persecution that's going on in India?
Well, the work that Voice of the Martyrs does in India, as well as the other countries where we help persecuted Christians, falls kind of under three main categories. The first one is persecution response. So, when a pastor in a village is beaten and goes to the hospital and needs x-rays and maybe even needs surgery, Voice of the Martyrs is able to come alongside and help with some of those medical expenses and help him get back on his feet and get recovered and get back into ministry. So persecution response is one of the main areas. A secondary area is what we call frontline workers. And I call them pre-persecuted Christians because they are doing ministry, they're doing outreach in a place where Christians are persecuted. It's probably only a matter of time until they themselves are persecuted. And so with these frontline workers, we provide them with tools and training to further their ministry. as well as encouragement. One of my favorite things that we do is bring frontline workers together for kind of a conference or a retreat, a place where they can be trained and encouraged and deepen their understanding of the scripture, but also a place where they can simply fellowship together and hear each other's stories and pray together and pray for each other and get phone numbers where they can text each other throughout the year. And it becomes a source of encouragement as they realize, hey, I'm not the only one going through this. There's other people also doing God's work, also facing persecution, and we can pray for each other and we can encourage each other. So that's the second part of our overseas work. And then the third part is Bibles. There is a great need for Bibles, and we are distributing Bibles in India as well as other countries where Voice of the Martyrs works. And so those are kind of the three focuses of our overseas work. And all three of those are happening in the nation of India.
Well, that's great stuff. Todd Nettleton from Voice of the Martyrs Radio. And Todd, thanks again for joining us and shedding some light on what's going on in India. As I said at the beginning, a lot of people, including myself, just weren't aware of the level of persecution that's going on there against religious minorities. And it's great to see the work you guys are doing on the ground there, so people can be informed and actually have a way to assist and lend a helping hand to our brothers and sisters in Christ over there who are in need. So Todd, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you. It's been great to be with you.